The maul came down on the Varith infiltrator's helmet with a sound like a dropped skillet, and something wet slid off the visor before matriarch Vesari On Talvek's translator could catch the human's next word. He was a janitor. That was the word for him. The tired custodian who apologized every time she caught him humming while he stripped wax from the creche corridor. Earth was known across the compact of 6 for sending its useless to distant stations to age out quietly. And Silvermoor was as quiet as postings came. 300 souls of 6 species orbiting a dead moon nobody wanted. But by the time the second alarm cord finished, there were 2 dead assassins on her deck from an elite that had never lost a target in 40 years of shadow war. 3 more of them somewhere in her station. And the human was already turning toward her with the maul low and the eyes wrong. 6 hours later, every signatory of a treaty her mothers had died trying to sign would put their name to it, because none of them would be able to look this exhausted man in the eye and lie. The air in the creche corridor tasted of copper, burnt ozone, and drainpan grease. 9 hours before that alarm, that same air had smelled almost sweet, the manufactured lavender the station chief pumped through the creche vents on compact day, a gesture nobody but the Duvani could smell, but which the Duvani appreciated so deeply that the practice had become ritual. Matriarch Vesari On Talvek had been standing at the observation glass, counting hatchlings the way a lung counts breaths. 14 of them curled in the shared bassinets that had taken the compact 40 years of trust and blood to permit. 4 species, 4 smells, 4 sleep rhythms, 4 sets of tiny fingers or tiny hooks or tiny fringing cilia, all sharing warmth from the same low copper coils. The vote on the 6 Sun Accord was in 9 days, and this bassinet room was its argument in miniature, a proof that the impossible had already been done, that the mothers of 5 worlds had lent their most fragile children to each other and slept. Her true name was a rasp of grinding molar plates the translator flattened to Talvek. She preferred the flattening. 2 of her mothers had died in the Keswick frontier riots, and to hear the old syllables in a stranger's mouth still put her back in a burning corridor at 20. Talvek meant, in the coarse compact trade tongue roughly, the one who counts what stays. She had counted for 41 years. She had never lost a hatchling. Down the corridor someone was humming. She turned her head. 6 paces from the creche door, a human in grey coveralls was pushing a mop across the deck, plating with the slow, tired thoroughness of a man who had been doing this exact task for 100 years and expected to do it for another 100. His name tape read Hawes, first name Miles, second shift custodial, cleared for compact adjacent spaces after the standard 6-month background hold. He hummed under his breath, a low 3-note thing that repeated and repeated, the way humans hummed to themselves when they were thinking about nothing and everything at once. He noticed her looking and lifted the mop clear of the deck as though caught in a small crime. "Sorry," he said. "Didn't mean to wake anybody." "You did not," said Talvek. "Force of habit. My gran used to smack me for humming in church." She did not know what a church was, precisely, and the translator gave her 3 possible glosses, none of them useful. She let it pass. "The floor does not need to be so clean," she said. "The Duvani prefer some dust. It is medicinal for their skin." He tilted his head. "Huh." She watched him consider it, and then set the mop against the wall and take a rag from his pocket and start rubbing a small dark streak from the doorframe instead. "I'll leave the floor. The frame's just grease, though. That's mine to fix." "Very well." She watched him work. He was a tall man, but tall in a way that read as tired rather than imposing, shoulders slumped, chin low, a slight favor to his left knee. His hair had gone grey at the temples and stubborn brown everywhere else. His hands moved with a distracted economy, as though they were being run by a subroutine he no longer supervised. When he finished with the frame, he wiped the rag on the inside of his coverall pocket and turned to go, and then stopped and turned back. "Ma'am," he said, Is the little Sereth one in the third bassinet all right? She was fussing when I came through yesterday. I heard her again earlier. Talvek felt a small ripple of surprise. Sereth hatchlings did not fuss audibly. Sereth fussing was a subsonic thrum, felt in the sternum of anyone who shared their pod. It was not a noise humans should be able to hear. She has an inflamed feeding cilium, Talvek said carefully. The nurse is treating it. How did you know she was fussing? He blinked as though the question had cost him something. Then he tapped his chest, near his heart. You feel it here? It's not a sound, it's a shake. Once you know it, you know it. You have been around Sereth infants before? Long time ago, said Miles Hawes. And there was, in the smallest crease at the corner of his mouth, a shape that was not sad exactly, but that was not sad either. Long, long time ago. He touched the brim of the cap he wasn't wearing, out of some old reflex, and walked off toward the vent room, humming. Talvek stood at the observation glass for a long while after he had gone, staring at the little Sereth's bassinet as though the glass were the problem. The three-note thing was still in her head an hour later, when the smiling Vareth envoy arrived for the courtesy tour. His name, the one he offered, was Khan Volur, and he shook her manipulator hand with the exact pressure protocol required and no more. Vareth were long, elegant beings of banded chitin and gleaming filament eyes, and their diplomats were trained from the shell to present as harmless. Khan Volur had come with 2 aides and a small basket of what he called peace fruit, a pale, translucent thing that turned out to taste, disappointingly, of nothing. He asked to see the creche, and Talvek allowed it, because the six-son accord depended on such gestures. He walked the aisle of bassinets with his manipulators politely folded. He paused at the shared bassinet where a Sereth hatchling lay coiled against a Duvani, and asked, in a voice the translator rendered as reverent, whether he might briefly hold one. Talvek hesitated. Then she nodded, because to refuse would be an insult that would ripple through 9 days of vote-counting. Khan Volur lifted the little Sereth into his cupped manipulators as though he had been rehearsing the motion for months, which, she thought later, he had. He looked down at the hatchling with those bright filament eyes and made a soft, cooing series of clicks the translator did not touch, because it recognized the sound as a Vareth lullaby and knew better than to interpret art. The hatchling settled against his chitin and sighed a subsonic sigh. So small, said the envoy, so easy to lose. Easy to lose is why we protect them, said Talvek, and heard too late that her voice had gone hard. She softened it. Would you care for tea, envoy? The Duvani press a lovely cold blend for guests. He set the hatchling gently back into the bassinet, kissed the tip of his own manipulator, and touched the kiss to the copper coil where the little Sereth's head lay. I would be honored, he said, and followed her out. At the doorway, Miles Hawes was on his knees with a wrench, tightening something under a floor panel grating. He did not look up. Khan Volur stepped over him with the polite indifference of a diplomat stepping over any piece of station infrastructure. The envoy's rear manipulator brushed the human's shoulder as he passed. Hawes did not react. His face, which Talvek could see and the envoy could not, did not move at all. His eyes tracked the envoy's back until the diplomat had turned the far corner and then went back down to the wrench. He said nothing. But when he stood, some minutes later, he did it slowly, as though he had been sitting on his own weight the entire time to keep from moving too fast. He caught her looking. Sorry, he said again. I'll get out of the mom's way. You are not in my way, said Talvek. Then, because something in her sternum was still shaking a little, and she did not know why, she added, Custodian Hawes. Ma'am, do the vents on this deck run past the envoy's suite? He considered the question for the space of one long breath. Then he said mildly, They do, ma'am. 2 decks up, then a jog left where they cross the waterline. Why? No reason, said Talvek. She had no reason. She had a hatchling shake in her sternum, and a smile from a diplomat that had not lit his filament eyes, and a janitor who had not flinched when a Varith touched him. "You keep those little ones safe, ma'am," said Miles Hawes, and went back to his wrench, humming. She dreamed that night, in the low copper hum of her own quarters, of a wave that would not break. It stood over her the whole dream, tall and translucent and blue, refusing to fall. She woke at 2:14 with her sternum shaking harder than it had shaken all day, and by the time she was upright, the pressure change in her inner ears had already told her what the sensors would not confirm for another minute and 40 seconds. The station was breached. She was down the corridor of second ring, then in the lift, then in the lower corridor, before the first alarm cord sounded, and by the time she rounded the last bend to the creche door, she was already sprinting on all four of her lower plates, in a way she had not sprinted since she was 20, and the world was on fire. She rounded the bend and stopped. Miles Hawes stood at the creche door, the tungsten maul in his right hand, the one he used to knock ice from drain pans in the utility bay. The ridiculous, quiet, mundane maul she had watched him swing at frozen sludge on 100 boring afternoons was black wet from head to grip. Two Varith infiltrators lay in the corridor behind him, one on its face with the shoulder plate of its plasma armor caved in at the collar joint, one on its back with its helmet cracked from crown to jaw like a struck egg. Steam rose off them, where the sub-zero venting mist met the residual heat of dying suits. He did not look at her. He was watching the seam of the far bulkhead, the one that led toward the docking ring, and his weight was balanced very slightly forward on the balls of his feet in a way she had never seen him stand. There was a wet patch on the side of his coverall, low, at the ribs, that was not from the infiltrators. It was his. "3 left," he said without turning. His voice was the same voice that had apologized for humming. "Get the little ones behind the plating." Talvek obeyed a human for the first time in her life. She hit the creche door, open-palmed, and it recognized her matriarchal print and swept aside. Inside, 14 hatchlings had gone silent in the way small things go silent when the shape of the world above them changes. She scooped the little Sereth from the third bassinet, the one Ekt Khan Volur had held, and pressed the emergency shielding stud on the wall with her secondary manipulator. Reinforced blast panels dropped around the bassinet cluster with a hiss of hydraulic bleed. She backed out, hit the seal, and stood in the corridor again. Hawes had not moved. He had, however, spoken again while she was inside. He was speaking now, into the collar of his coverall, into a comm she had not known he had. "Chief," he said, 2 down at Creche 7, 3 unaccounted for. One of them's your friend Ekt. Get me the manifest and lock down docking. If they get to the pods, we lose the treaty." Silence in his ear. Then, more quietly, "Yeah, I know what I said." He clicked off, turned his head, looked at her. His eyes were the same tired eyes that had looked at her over the mop that morning. They were also entirely not. "Ma'am," he said, "you should be inside." "You are wounded," she said. He glanced down at his ribs as though noticing for the first time. "Yeah." He sounded surprised. "Fair enough." He fished a small silver rectangle from his hip pocket, a thing she had seen him use on cracked coolant lines a dozen times, and popped it open. It unfolded into a curved staple gun, medical. He hooked up the front of his coverall, exposed a long horizontal slice along his lower left ribs, where a Varith filament blade had opened him nearly to the bone, and without a word to her or a change in his breathing, drove 9 staples across the wound in a slow, deliberate line. Blood ran down his hip and into the top of his boot. He did not make a sound. Talvek made a sound. He looked up. "Sorry," he said. "Don't be delicate. Just fill the hole." You Sereth all right in there?" "Yes." "Good." He clicked the staple gun shut, tucked it back into his hip pocket, and picked the maul up again. The whole small surgery had taken perhaps 14 seconds. "You should get to your suite, ma'am. Lock down. This isn't done." "I'm not leaving my hatchlings." He studied her a moment. Then he nodded once. "All right. Then stay behind me. Do exactly what I say. When I say down, you go down. When I say run, you run." "Yes." "And ma'am." "Yes? I'm going to do some things you're going to want to look away from. Look away." "I will not." His mouth crooked in that not sad shape she had seen at the observation glass. "Suit yourself," he said, and turned and started to walk. She followed. By the time they reached the second bulkhead, the one that gave onto the maintenance shaft between the creche wing and the diplomatic quarter, the station's alarm had escalated to full evacuation tone, and Chief Uljak's voice was crackling out of the wall-mounted speakers in the panicked stutter of a man reading a script written 30 seconds ago. Every corridor was to be sealed. Every non-essential body was to be behind a blast panel. Every remaining Vareth diplomat was to be located and detained, pending investigation. "He's a beat behind me," muttered Hawes at the crackle. "He always is. Doesn't matter. He'll catch up." He put his shoulder to the maintenance bulkhead, keyed something into a service panel with 3 fingers of his free hand, and the bulkhead pulled aside on a hiss of pressurization. Beyond it was a narrow crawlway. He stepped through without breaking stride, and Talvik, larger than a human by a full third, had to fold herself sideways to fit. "You know this station better than the chief," she said low. "I know the shafts," he said. "That's my job." "That is not why you know them." He did not answer. They came out of the crawlway into the low corridor that ran under the diplomatic pavilion, and there, in the pale blue running lights that guided drones between service bays, they saw the third of the 5 infiltrators. He was moving fast. He had 2 hostages, a young Colby steward in her house livery, and a Duvani cook with the flower still on his fringing cilia. The infiltrator held them together with a filament tether, a nasty piece of Vareth field gear that would slice a body in 3 at the first sharp jerk. He had a filament pistol at the base of the Colby's spine. Hawes went very still. "Down," he breathed. Talvik folded. The infiltrator had not seen them yet. He was speaking in the sibilant Vareth low tongue into a collar-com. The translator, half blind because Talvik's earpiece did not have full Vareth war-cant loaded, gave her only fragments. "Brood safe. 3 window. Loud enough. Accord." "He's talking to Ect," whispered Hawes. His mouth was almost at her ear slit. "He's saying it's loud enough to cover the extraction. He's going to blow the creche wing so nobody notices Ect and his 2 aides walking out the diplomatic gate. That is... yeah. But my hatchlings... The blast panels'll hold. You did that. Well done." She turned her head to stare at him. "You did well," he said again, gently and moved. She would try in the years that came after to describe what she saw in the next 14 seconds. She never found the words. Miles Hawes rose from a crouch and covered the 12 paces to the infiltrator in a low, silent, gliding step she had only ever seen predators use, not humans. His weight did not shift audibly. His boots did not squeak. When he reached the infiltrator's back, he did not swing the maul. He caught the filament pistol wrist with his left hand, pushed it up and away from the Colby steward's spine, put the tungsten head of the maul precisely against the seam where the Vareth's shoulder plate met the collar of his armor, and drove. The plate did not break. The plate deflected coherent light, but the seam under it, a hair-fine gap between 2 panels of chitin alloy, could not absorb a slow, dense, kinetic impact. The maul went in a hand's breadth. The infiltrator dropped without a sound. Hawes caught the filament tether before it could tension against the hostages. He unhooked it, 1 loop at a time, from the Colby and the Duvani, with the same distracted care he had used to wipe the doorframe. The Colby steward began to shake. "You're all right," Hawes said. in a voice that was almost the same voice that had asked about the little Sereth. "You're all right. Go with the matriarch. She's going to take you to the shielded room. Just keep your head down and walk. Don't run, walk." The Colvi went. The Duvani cook, less shocked but paler than his species usually managed, went after her, herding her with his big, soft, fringing hands. Hawes turned to Talvek. There was fresh blood on his coverall now. The punched shoulder joint had bled a fine spray of Vareth ichor across his chest and cheek. He did not seem to notice. "You said 3, she said. Her voice would not stop shaking. "Behind me, there were only 2, and that was 1. "Yeah. Miles." He looked at her, and for a heartbeat she thought. She was certain. She saw the tired custodian again, standing on the far side of that mop. Then it was gone. "There's 5, Ma'am," he said. "2 you saw. 1 we just met, that's 3. The last 2 are Echt and his top aide. They're not muscle. They're the reason all this happened." He glanced up the corridor toward the diplomatic pavilion. "And there was going to be a 6th. Local, somebody compact side, greased to unlock the mold doors from the inside. I don't have his name yet." "You? How do you know?" "I've done this before." "Where?" He looked at her a long moment. Then he said quietly, "Ma'am, I'd love to explain everything, but we're on a clock. Get the steward and the cook behind panels. Then go find Chief Uljak. Tell him I need everything you can pull on Echt Khan Velour's schedule for the last month. Every meeting, every comm. And tell him personally to open my file. All of it. The one with the seal. I'm out of time to be quiet about it. Your file." "Yes." "Custodian Hawes." He was already moving. Chief Uljak, when Talvek found him 30 seconds later behind a barricade of overturned status consoles in the operations bay, was a Colvi of the older kind, heavy through the shoulders, grey at the crest, with the small round eyes of a species that had once been prey. He was shouting into 3 headsets at once. When she said Hawes's name and the words "open his file," all of it, the seal, Uljak went very still. He said now. He said now. The chief dropped 2 of the headsets. He crossed to a wall panel, keyed in a sequence Talvek could not follow, and put his palm to a scanner. The panel bloomed open. He pulled out a single narrow data slate. "I've been carrying this 3 years, he said. "Terran attaché office made me swear on my mother's shell I'd never open it unless he said, or unless he died. I always figured it'd be the second one." He opened it. He read. Talvek watched his crest go a slow, mottled orange, which in a Colvi was the color of shock. When he had read it 3 times through, he handed the slate to her without a word. The file was not long. She read it aloud, because her secondary manipulator was shaking, and holding the slate steady made no difference, and she needed to hear the words in the air of her own station. Uljak did not stop her. She thought later that he needed to hear them too. Hawes, Miles, Andrew. Origin. Cold Harbor Colony, Sigma Wayland Cluster. Cold Harbor was a heavy world holding 1.6 standard gravity, thin atmosphere, corrosive salt seas, 9-year winters. Its children learned to breathe against their own weight before they learned to walk. Its adults averaged bone densities 2.4 times Terran mean and cardiac output nearly double. Hawes had been born there. Hawes had grown up there. His mother had died of a mining accident when he was 11. His father of exhaustion when he was 17. At 19, Miles Hawes had enlisted in the Terran Frontier Marine Expeditionary. He had asked, on his intake form, to be posted somewhere quiet. He had been posted instead to the Junco Line. The Junco Line, said the file, had been the Terran attempt to stop the last Vareth expansion war from crossing into compact adjacent space, and its central operations had involved 32 months of continuous bunker clearing along a 200-kilometer front. Hawes's unit had been the 3rd Special Reconnaissance Company, colloquially known. And here the file used a phrase her translator refused to render, and which Uljak, without looking at her, muttered in the trade tongue as the ghost drills. The third had been the unit sent into holes nobody else came out of. Their mission profile was, and here the file was unusually direct, terminal. Dig out the last, hardest, deepest infiltration nests of the Varith Concord using kinetic ordnance and the fact that Cold Harbor-born humans could survive gravity, pressure, and toxin loads that killed lighter men in minutes. Miles Hawes, said the file, had walked out of 32 consecutive bunker clearances. The rest of the third had not. By month 29, he was, by attrition, the last active member of the third. High Command had offered him a commission and a desk. He had refused. He had asked instead to finish the front and go home to Cold Harbor and never wear a uniform again. At month 32, on the last bunker of the last sector, Hawes had refused a direct order to withdraw from a collapsing tunnel because a Colvey orphan, a child rescued from a Varith breeding pen and not on the Terran manifest, was still inside. He had gone back. He had cleared the tunnel. He had come out with the child on his back and a piece of shrapnel in his lung and one intact bunker nest behind him. The commanding officer had ordered him court-martialed for insubordination. The Colvey ambassador of the sector, learning of the child, had demanded he be decorated. The Terran brass, unable to do both, had compromised. They had discharged him quietly, sealed his record, and paid him what they owed. The Colvey Assembly of Mothers had, without informing him, filed a debt mark against the Colvey species in his personal favor, an old ceremonial ledger line that no living Colvey had held in 90 years. He had come home to Cold Harbor. He had spent 5 years on a fishing skiff. He had, in the file's dry phrase, kept to himself. He had a sister named Sarah, who lived in a river town called Prairie Elbow in the Iowa territory of Old Earth. Sarah had a daughter named Ivy. Ivy was 9 years old, standard Terran, and had a heart condition that would require surgery the family could not on its own afford. Miles Hawes had come out of retirement, the file called it retirement, at the request of the Terran Diplomatic Corps, which had received intelligence 18 months earlier that the Varith Concord intended to sabotage the Six-Sun Accord vote by staging an incident at a compact creche. The Corps had asked him to accept a quiet civilian posting at Silvermore Station under his own name to be their eyes on the ground and to intervene only if the creche were directly threatened. In return, they had committed to a sum sufficient to pay for Ivy's surgery and to build a heated, storm-safe house for Sarah on the north bank of the Prairie Elbow River before it froze that winter. Hawes had accepted. He had insisted in his one recorded reply on 2 conditions: that no other human be sent to help him because he could disappear more easily alone, and that the Colvey ambassador of Silvermore Station be informed of his presence because he did not intend to be surprised twice by his own government. The Colvey ambassador was Chief Uljak. Talvek looked up from the slate. Uljak was staring at the ceiling. "I have," he said in a voice that was thicker than a Colvey voice should be, "been carrying groceries past that man for 3 years. "He carries mops," said Talvek. "He does not." The station shook, not a large shake, a localized one, the kind of thump a small breach shows against a bulkhead you are standing near. Uljak's eyes snapped down. "The vent line," he said. "Diplomatic pavilion, vent line into Echt's suite. He's going in." "Through the vents. That's why he asked about them. That's why he's been mopping this deck for 3 months. He knows every airway on this station better than my chief engineer. He's not going in through the door. He's coming down from the ceiling." Talvek's sternum went still. "Chief," she said, "how many enemies remain?" Uljak counted on his short 3-clawed fingers. 2 of the muscle down, 3rd down at the maintenance corridor. That leaves the top aide and the envoy. 2. He paused. "And there is a 6th, compact side." He said it. "Whoever unlocked the mold doors from inside. Do you know who it is? I have suspicions I would rather die than name aloud until I have proof." then find proof. Yes, matriarch. She looked down at the slate in her manipulator. The little file had turned into a stone in her palm. Chief, she said, say a thing I need to hear. Uljak looked at her a long, sad moment. He asked for real coffee, he said quietly. When he first came out here, he asked me. I laughed. I told him nobody drank real beans on a station this small. He said the paste tasted like burnt regret. He said if I ever got him a jar, he'd owe me. I never got him a jar. Get him one, said Talvek. If he's alive when this is over, I will get him 100. The station shook again, smaller. 2 decks up in the diplomatic pavilion, in a suite panelled in polished obsidian and lit by imported Vareth candlemites that flickered in tiny caged jars. Ekt Khan Valur, the envoy, was folding 2 spare filament blades into the lining of his travelling cloak, with the neat, unhurried movements of a professional who had reviewed his exit plan 17 times and rehearsed it 4. His top aide, an older Vareth named Nasoth, banded in the dark green of veteran field operatives, sat on the arm of a low couch and monitored a small tactical slate on which 5 red diamonds should have been advancing from the creche wing toward the docking ring in a slow, methodical pincer. 3 of the diamonds had gone dark. That is unfortunate, said Nasoth mildly. Which 3? Cordon 3, Cordon 5, Interception 2. Ekitakan Volur paused, one filament blade half-folded, and blinked with all 4 of his filament eyes at once. The maintenance corridor? Yes. That is a service technician, station manifest, custodial. Custodial, repeated Nasoth. Yes, that is what the manifest says. Terrans do not deploy operators on compact stations. It is against every accord. Against every written accord. Do not be paranoid, Nasoth. I am paid to be paranoid, envoy. It is why you keep me. Ekt Khan Volur set down the blade. He crossed to a decanter and poured himself a small measure of the pale, translucent, peace fruit distillate he had brought from the Corward provinces. He drank it in one long, thoughtful pull and set the glass down beside the tactical slate. How long, he said, until the creche wing charges detonate? 12 minutes, local time. And the pod, warmed, ready, cleared by the compact side asset. Then we will not need the muscle. We will need only to walk. Envoy. Yes? If the 3 who fell to a single technician, I would like your permission to leave one blade unfolded. Permission granted. Nasoth reached, very slowly and very naturally, into her own coat and eased a filament blade out to lie along her forearm, hidden by the drape of her sleeve. Above them, in the ceiling vents, the 3-note humming stopped. Neither of them heard. Down below, in the operations bay, Talvek watched Chief Uljak call up the station's internal camera feeds on the main display and begin to pull, one by one, the ones that showed the vents around the diplomatic pavilion. Most of them were dark. The Vareth had cut the feeds cleanly, everywhere their extraction route ran. Uljak swore softly. He asked for the schedule of the envoy, Talvek said. He has it. I sent it while he was walking. He has it now in the earpiece he pretended not to have. He has bled a lot. Yes. The wound. He stapled it in the corridor, in front of me. Uljak closed his eyes briefly. Cauterization, staples. That's 3rd Company field medicine. They taught them to keep working through anything but a heart shot. Sometimes through those. He is still bleeding under the staples. I know. The chief bent and did something Talvek had never seen a Colby do outside a morning hall. He pressed his crest to the metal edge of the console and closed his 3 eyes and stayed that way for perhaps a full breath. When he stood again, his crest was streaked with orange and his gaze was steady. Matriarch, he said, I need you to do something. Say it. I need you to go personally to the Compact Liaison Office. And I need you to arrest personally, in the name of your matriarchal seat and every mother of 5 worlds, the compact liaison officer. His name is Corbethun. He is one of ours. He has been for 11 years. He is. Compact liaison, yes, it has to be him. He is the only one on this station who could have unlocked the mole doors from inside. He is the only one with the codes. You are sure? I am not sure. But he is the only one who fits. And if I'm wrong, he will forgive me. And if I'm right and I go arrest him myself, he will kill me before I close on him, because he was trained by the same instructors who trained me, and he is faster than I am by half a stride. He will not, however, kill you, because you are a matriarch, and to lay a hand on a matriarch under compact law is a death he will not choose. He may choose it if he is already choosing extraction. Then take 4 of my armored guards. Take 6. Take everyone. Just take him alive if you can. Because if he is dead, we will spend a decade proving what we all know. Chief, yes. Do you think Miles Hawes will live? Uljak looked at the darkened camera feed of the diplomatic pavilion ceiling. I think, he said, Miles Hawes will finish what he came here to do. Whether he lives past finishing it is another question. Talvek turned, gathered 4 of Uljak's armored guards with a jerk of her manipulator, and left the ops bay at a pace her lower plates had not moved at in 20 years. In the ceiling vent, Miles Hawes lay on his side, one hand pressed to his ribs, the other easing a service panel free from its 4 maglocks with the patience of a man diffusing an heirloom. Below him, through a slit of pried-open grating, he could see the top of Ekt Khan Volur's polished obsidian meeting table. Above him, he could see nothing. Around him, the vent shaft smelled of copper, his and burnt ozone, and the peculiar sharpness of Varith panic perfume, which they secreted from the base of their necks when they were plotting an exit. He was tired. He had been tired for a long time. In the 2nd month of the Junko line, in a bunker so deep that the pressure had made one of his squadmates' ears bleed from the inside, Hawes had learned that tiredness was a country you could live in as long as there was somebody at home worth coming back to. He had been 20. His sister Sarah had been 16. Their mother had been dead 5 years, their father dead a year. Sarah had been all the home he had. Now Sarah was 39 and had a daughter of her own, and the daughter was named Ivy, and Ivy was 9, and Ivy would be 10 in April if a surgeon in Chicago cut a certain valve in a certain way in 6 weeks' time. And Miles Hawes had already sent the credits home and did not need to be alive after tonight for the surgery to happen. That was the shape of the deal. That was what he had insisted on. But he wanted to be alive after tonight. He wanted very much to be alive after tonight, because Sarah had said, in the last message she had sent him, that Ivy had asked if her uncle would come home for Christmas this year. Sarah had not asked him. Ivy had. Ivy had said, even for a day. He steadied his breathing. He set the maul across his chest. He drew from inside his coverall the second tool he had brought, a short, dense, tungsten-cord crowbar that fit under his palm like a promise. He waited. Below in the suite, Nasoth stood. She had heard nothing. She was simply in the way of veteran field operatives, uncomfortable. She crossed the room, drank in her lower manipulator, and stopped beneath the ceiling vent Miles Hawes had been prying open. She looked up. Her filament eyes narrowed at the fine, dark line at the edge of the grating. Her mouth opened to speak. Miles Hawes dropped through the grating. He landed on Nasoth with the full weight of a heavy world-born human at 1 gravity, which is to say, he landed on her with the impact of a man diving from 4 times her height in her own atmosphere. The drink went one way. Her filament blade came the other. The blade caught the outside of his left forearm as they went down and slit the coverall and the meat under it in a long, shallow tear. He did not slow. He drove the crowbar down and forward under her chin, into the seam between the 3rd and 4th chitin band of her throat, and pushed. She did not die instantly. but she died quietly. He rolled off her, kept his weight low, and turned to face the envoy. Ektan Volur had, in the 4 seconds of the drop, retreated 3 long strides toward the far wall, produced a filament pistol from inside his cloak, and steadied it, quite calmly, on the crowbar in Miles Hawes's fist. "Custodian Hawes," he said without heat, "3rd Company, Junco Line. My mother's brother died in your 3rd bunker." "I'm sorry to hear it," said Miles Hawes. "He was a good soldier." "I'm sure he was. You cannot cross the room before I fire." "I don't intend to." The envoy's filament eyes flickered. "Where," he said, "is the mall?" "Up there," said Miles Hawes, and jerked his chin at the ceiling. Ektan Volur made the smallest possible glance up. The mall, released from Miles Hawes's boot hook at the beginning of his answer, had been falling all that time. It struck the envoy on the right shoulder, at the exact seam where his chitin band met the joint, with the whole 3 kilograms of dropped tungsten behind it. His arm went dead. The filament pistol clattered. Miles Hawes crossed the room. He was, by then, staggering. The blade on his arm had opened a vessel he had not counted on. His boot squelched. His breath came ragged. He crossed the room anyway, because that was the deal, and because Ektan Volur was already reaching, with his working manipulator, toward the inside of his other sleeve, where a second filament blade lay hidden, and because Miles Hawes was slower than the Varath envoy, but heavier, and because the tungsten crowbar was already moving. The crowbar met the envoy at the temple. The obsidian table caught the envoy on the way down. The candle mites in their little cage jars flickered once in unison and steadied. The suite went silent. Miles Hawes sat down on the arm of the low couch. He set the crowbar beside him. He reached into his hip pocket, took out the little staple gun, and, with fingers that were starting to lose their fine motor, drove 7 staples into his left forearm without looking. He wrapped his coverall sleeve tight around the arm and knotted it with his teeth. He sat. He waited. 2 decks down, Talvek reached the compact liaison office with 4 armored Colvi guards and Chief Uljak's writ in her manipulator, and found Corbethan, the liaison, at his desk, calmly finishing a cup of tea. He did not stand when she came in. He did not go for a weapon. He looked at her a long, tired moment and set the cup down. "Matriarch," he said. His crest was grey. His eyes were very old. "I take it the janitor has done his work." "You knew." "Chief Uljak has been muttering in his sleep for 3 years. I have not been deaf." "Why?" Corbethan closed his eyes. "They took my daughter's daughter," he said. 2 years ago, not in a raid, in a hospital corridor, on a leave world. Varath intelligence in Colvi hands, in a compact facility. They said they would return her if I opened the mole doors on a night of their choosing. I did not open them for the treaty. I opened them because I have loved a child for 5 years who I only saw once." Talvek stood very still. "Is she alive?" "They said she would be waiting for me at the pod. They said if I did not go, they would send me her fingers one by one." "You know she's not there." Corbethan's eyes did not open. "I know." Talvek turned to the guards. "Take him," she said, "with kindness. Restrain him. Read him nothing, and Corbethan, matriarch, when we find her, if we find her, you will not see her again." "I know," said Corbethan, and stood and offered his own wrists to the restraints. She left him with the guards. She went back up to the diplomatic pavilion at a pace that made her guards run. The corridor outside Ektan Volur's suite was quiet, in the way corridors are quiet when the thing that filled them has gone. She keyed the suite door with her matriarchal seal and stepped through and found Miles Hawes sitting on the arm of a low couch, staple gun in his lap, crowbar beside him, coverall sleeve knotted tight around his forearm, staring at the 2 bodies on the polished obsidian floor. He looked up when she came in. He tried to smile. He mostly succeeded. "Ma'am," he said, "you're supposed to be behind a panel." "You are supposed to be dead," she said, and heard the wobble in her own voice and did not care. "Working on it," he said, slowly. She crossed to him. She took his good wrist. She turned it over. His pulse was there, too fast and thready, but there. "Medical," she said into her comm. "Diplomatic pavilion. Now, do you hear me? Now." "Coming, matriarch," said a voice. She did not let go of his wrist. "Miles," she said. "The other 3 infiltrators, the muscle, the one in the maintenance corridor, was that all?" "Yeah." "And Nasoth?" "Yeah." "And Ect?" "Yeah." "And Corbethun is in restraints." He closed his eyes at that. When he opened them, they were shining. Did he say why? He said his granddaughter. "Oh," said Miles Hawes very quietly. "Oh, God." "Yes." "Find her, ma'am. If she's out there, find her." "We will. Promise me." "I promise you." He nodded once. He let his shoulders drop. He said, in a voice that was almost the voice that had apologized for humming, "Ma'am, do you think somebody could rustle up a coffee? A real one, not the paste. Chief owes me." Talvek laughed. She had not expected to. It came out of her the way tears come out of a Duvani in a helpless slow leak, and she could not stop it for a full 10 seconds. "He will bring you 100, she said. "One'll do," said Miles Hawes, and passed out sideways off the arm of the couch, and Talvek caught him before he hit the polished obsidian, and by the time medical arrived, she was still holding him up. He did not die. That was the phrase Chief Uljak used in the after-report that would circulate through every consulate and every mother's hall of the Compact of 6 in the weeks that followed, a phrase deliberately plain, because plainness was the only decent way to say a thing so large. He did not die. He lost a great deal of blood. He required, on the medical table, 2 full transfusions of the Cold Harbor-tolerant type the station had never before had cause to stock, and he required, in the 6 hours after that, the personal attention of the finest Duvani surgeon in the sector, who came out of his operating theatre at last and said only, in the polite, formal grammar of a race that spoke through skin as much as through mouths, that the human had a spirit that had refused 3 separate invitations to leave, and that he expected, given time, that spirit to keep refusing. By dawn, Station Local, the 6th Sun Accord had been ratified. The vote had been called at sunrise in the Great Hall of the Compact Wing over the objections of the 2 envoys who had thought they had another 9 days to lobby. The reason for the sudden call was, formally, the discovery of an active plot to sabotage the Kresh Wing, and the informal but total moral collapse of any signatory who might have hesitated. Not one of them, standing in the Great Hall with the story of the night on their tongues, could look Matriarch Vesari On Talvek in the eye and claim that the debt she had contracted with a human janitor was somehow smaller than their pride. The Duvani signed first, the Sereth signed second, the Kolvi signed third, and Chief Uljak, who was allowed to sign in his ambassador's capacity, wept openly onto the document. The compact seals were affixed. The candlemites in the Great Hall were opened, and the accord was, at last, alive. Talvek did not attend the vote. She was instead sitting in a medical bay chair beside a human who had woken twice and slept 3 times, and who, on the second waking, had asked whether the little Sereth in the 3rd bassinet was all right, and receiving the answer yes, had gone back to sleep, smiling. Chief Uljak found her there. He carried in his upper manipulators a small metallic canister sealed with wax. He set it on the table beside Miles Hawes's bed. "Real beans," he said. "I have been saving them for 3 years. I did not know I had been saving them for tonight." Talvek touched the canister with a claw tip. "He will drink it," she said. "He will." The accord was read aloud that afternoon, over station-wide comms, and the medical bay filled up slowly, with delegates come to look at the sleeping man who had signed the treaty with his ribs. They stood, most of them, silently. A few tried to speak. Talvek turned them away with a hand. The Sereth delegation left a small bowl of water on the floor beside his bed, which was the highest honor their species could offer to a stranger, a thing they had done twice in 3,000 years. The Duvani delegation left on his blanket, a folded square of the coarse grey weaving they used in their own funerals, but reversed and rehemmed to be a blanket for a living hero, a small joke and a large compliment at once. The Colby delegation left the debt mark, not the ceremonial one his file had said the Assembly of Mothers had filed in his favor a decade before, on the Junco line. A new one, a living one, signed in the round claw print of every Colby ambassador and matriarch of the sector, delivered on a slab of pale bone porcelain that read, in the trade tongue, "No ledger holds this." It was set on the wall above his bed. It stayed there until he woke. He woke, fully, at 11:09 station time, 3 days after the alarm. Talvek was not in the room. She had been called out for the 5th time in 2 days by a delegation who could not quite believe the treaty was real and wanted a mother to confirm it for them. It was Chief Uljak who was in the chair when Hawes opened his eyes. "Chief," said Miles Hawes in the same tired voice, cracked from 3 days of dry throat. "You're going to owe me more than coffee." "Custodian." "Sergeant, actually, or was, long time ago." "Sergeant, then." Hawes tried to sit up. Uljak, with the professional gentleness of a Colby who had held wounded children through the Keswick riots, eased him upright with 3 careful claws. "Ect? Dead. Nasoth? Dead. Corbethan?" Uljak told him about Corbethan, about the granddaughter, about the arrest. Hawes listened all the way through and closed his eyes at the end and did not speak for a long time. When he opened them again, they were shining. "You'll look for her," he said. "I have already given the order." "Good. She's likely dead, Sergeant." "I know. Look anyway." "I am." He looked around the room. He saw the water. He saw the folded grey blanket. He saw the bone porcelain slab on the wall. He read it. He looked at Uljak. "Colby," he said. "Yes." "They gave me a second mark?" "Yes, the first one was for the child on the Junco line. This one is for us. You didn't have to." "We did." Hawes closed his eyes again. "Chief," he said, "I don't want a parade. I told them. I don't want a medal. I told them that too. They are giving you one anyway. Medal of the 6 Sons. It has never been given to a human. There is a great deal of ceremony. I would like you to know that I told them in your name no, and they said, in the courteous Duvani way, that it was not up to you." Hawes laughed. It hurt. He kept laughing anyway. "Coffee," he said when he could breathe. "Just tell me you brought coffee." Uljak reached for the canister. Talvek returned an hour later to find them both sitting with cracked mugs in their hands, the smell of ground coffee competing with the antiseptic smell of the ward. Hawes was pale. His left arm was in a sling. His ribs were bandaged from armpit to hip. He looked up at her over the rim of his mug. "Ma'am." "Miles." "Little Sereth?" "Fine. Fussing. Better." "Good." Talvek sat. "There is a matter," she said carefully. "The delegations wish to speak with you, all of them, not for a ceremony, for a request." "What request?" "The Compact has never had a human embassy. The Terran Attaché office is technically a bilateral concession. The delegations, individually and collectively, have asked whether you would consider accepting a permanent posting on Silvermore as liaison, not custodian. As Compact-recognized liaison, with your own suite and your own staff and the standing of a mid-tier envoy." "No," said Miles Hawes gently. "They will offer you the flagship home." "No. They will offer you a berth. Any route, any... No. They wish to give you something." Miles Hawes looked into his mug. He turned it in his hand once. He looked up at her. "Ma'am," he said, "I want 3 things. Just 3. Say them." "The coffee." "I've got it. Thank you, Chief." Earl-Jack lifted his mug. "A week of leave, just a week. I want to go home to a river town in Iowa and see my sister and my niece before the river freezes. She's 9. Ivy. She'll be 10 in April, I think. She asked me to come for Christmas. I'd like to say yes." "Granted," said Talvik. Then when she remembered she had no authority to grant a human's leave, she said it again, and this time she meant it as a matriarch. "Granted." "Third thing." "Yes." Miles Hawes took a long, careful sip of his coffee. He closed his eyes at the taste. When he opened them, that not sad shape was in the corner of his mouth again, and this time it was almost a smile. "Thank you kindly, Majesty," he said. "But just so we're clear." "Yes?" "I don't do windows." Talvik stared at him. He drank his coffee. Chief Earl-Jack, after a long moment in which he had clearly been trying and failing to contain himself, put his own mug down very carefully on the edge of the medical table, and, in the deep, slow, rolling laugh of a Colby who has not laughed in a decade, laughed. Talvik, after another moment, joined him. Her laugh sounded in her own ears like a rasp of grinding molar plates the translator had not yet learned to render, and for the first time in her life she did not mind hearing her own true voice at all. Outside the medical bay, in the great hall of the compact wing, the 6-sun accord was hanging on a wall of woven light. 14 hatchlings, human, sereth, Colby, Duvani, slept in a bassinet cluster 2 decks below. Breathing the manufactured lavender, the station chief still pumped through the creche vents on compact day. In a river town called Prairie Elbow, in the Iowa territory of Old Earth, a 9-year-old girl named Ivy had already been told her uncle was coming home for Christmas, and had already, without telling her mother, started making him a card. And in a small vent room on the 2nd ring of Silvermore Station, a tungsten maul that had once been used to knock ice from drain pans lay on a shelf beside a mop, cleaned and dry, and the 3-note humming that had filled the creche corridor most mornings would fill it again in a week, quieter now and infinitely louder. What a ride, what a night! Here is the truth this story leaves behind for you, plain and honest. The real weapon is never the maul. It is the reason a tired man will get up one more time. If this story moved you, drop a like. That is what keeps stories like Miles Hawes alive on this channel. Share it with somebody who still loves science fiction about one human standing in the doorway of the impossible. Hit subscribe and ring the bell so the next epic reaches you the moment it drops. And tell me in the comments, because I want to know, if you were Talvik that morning at the observation glass, would you have hired Miles Hawes to guard your children forever? Or would you have let him take the week of leave and the quiet fishing skiff and never called him back? Stay close and keep watching the dark between the stars.